Good evening, and welcome to Having a Drink with Mink. I'm your host, Jason Mink. It's great to see you this evening on this very special episode. It's the ghost of all the comics that I haven't bought this year come back to haunt me. Very special episode. Why is it a very special episode? 1,400 subscribers? Hey, that's pretty gosh darn good. Well, for us, anyway. Thank you to everyone who's been watching these videos and to everyone who's recently tuned in. It's great to see all of you. We hope you have a nice beverage on hand. Gosh knows we do. You ready for some? No, not yet. You know, he's a lightweight when it comes right down to it. I'm going to put you right there, buddy, and we're going to jump right into it. Like I said, it's great to see you specifically out of this eye. Had a little bit of work done, actually, and this one's not far behind. So if I do a little bit of squinting and a little bit of this and that in this episode, chalk it up to the spooky season. I'm giving you the evil eye, I am. Arr, arr. Does that hold water? It's the best I can do. Okay, as you can see, we got a whole lot of cool stuff on the desk. We're going to start right off with the Ghostly Sound Effects record, and this is from the good folks at Power Records. Now, many of you will remember Power Records as the company that brought us those Marvel and DC adaptations. They'd take a comic book, and then they'd have some actors in the studio somewhere read it. One summer afternoon, back before the Eagles needed it, you had ghostly sound effects on the back, rattling chains, squeaking doors, and ghostly screams. It is truly a haunting experience. Larry, can we get a little bit of this? Okay. Lock all the doors and bolt the windows, folks. Do you have bolts on your windows? You're going to want them. Quite like this artwork right here. Right on the fine line between spooky and sweet. Very evocative of that era, the early 1970s. Where I grew up. What can I say? It's the ghostly sounds. And that's from Power Records. Thank you, Power Records. Now, you'll notice some plastic people on the desk. Absolutely. This guy's one of my all-time favorites. He's the Migo Nosferatu figure. You betcha. And if you've watched this channel for any length of time, then you know I love to photograph my figures. And even more so, I am a huge advocate of taking your toys outside. And that's just what I did. And we went all the way to Aliquippa Cemetery. Established on the 24th of April, 1844, Aliquippa Cemetery is the 6th oldest rural cemetery in the United States, occupying over 300 acres of former farmland in western Pennsylvania. This sprawling, non-sectarian, wooded hillside park touches 4 separate neighborhoods. The cemetery is noted for its historical significance, interring multiple mayors, congressmen, and soldiers of the French and Indian War. Oh, and the guy who played Bob Dog on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood is also here, but that's a story for another time. The park is home to many impressive monuments, some of which have become world famous. It is also home to all manner of wildlife, including this friendly fellow that you see right here. Down boy. It's been about a decade since I was here last, but I have to say the sense of majesty and wonder remains as strong as ever. The outside world is left behind here, forgotten, as I find myself drawn into mysteries that crest every hillside. In spite of us, nature labors on, working quietly the miracles that sustain all life. But for all of the beauty, there is also horror. For monsters stalk this autumn night. And so there you have it. If you have some toys, I would highly recommend taking them outside, even if it's just out to the backyard or the little parklet down the street. Oh, sure, people might give you some strange looks for, crouching on your belly and taking close-ups of a werewolf, but hey, there are worse things a fella could be doing on this day and age. Am I right, folks? All right, we're going to move the big G, because we've got so very much to get to in the comic box. And we begin with the famous movie monster art of Basil Goos. If that name sounds familiar to you, well, it should. An American illustrator best known for his bold and evocative portraits, Basil Goos is a name revered by countless horror fans, thanks in large part to the dozens of covers he contributed to famous monsters of Filmland magazine in the 1960s and 70s. With his searing, almost electric palette, Goos manifested all manner of Hollywood horrors over his long career, although he started out providing art for men's magazines. No, not health and fitness crap. Real manly stuff, like being captured by angry natives and then thrown into a giant cage full of hungry canaries. Say what you will, that's way more interesting than GQ. Goos also knew his way around a sharp set of curves. We're talking honeys, babes, our better half, dig? He could have easily continued on in this vein for years to come, but the lure of the uncanny drew his brush in another direction. Monster covers, the artist had stated, were his chance to cut loose, With only black and white reference material to work from, Goos let inspiration choose his hues, often using boldly contrasting pigments to create eye-catching images. He used dyes, watercolors, and opaques, with endorsement from no less than publisher Jim Warren himself, to experiment to the best effect. The results were wildly successful, with Goos covers helping the magazine quickly rise to the top of the heap. It might be easier to list the iconic characters the artist hasn't painted. From Lon Chaney Sr.'s terrifying vampire in London After Midnight, all the way up to Christopher Lee as legendary Saruman in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Goos has made his mark. I first discovered his work free in a box of Post cereal when the company offered 4 full-color headshots. Think the White Album portraits, only with monsters. And while they were simply repurposed famous monsters covers, I didn't care. Even more so than the films themselves, these posters managed to capture the essence of the monsters as I knew them. After all, life was clear and defined, whereas Phantom and the others seemed to exist in a kind of visual miasma, drifting in and out of focus until they were right before your eyes. And while I didn't know a 10-cent word like aesthetic back then, I would attribute these very images to my own style of atmosphere and horror, albeit using words and not pigments. The subtle but meticulous use of light and shadow, along with the creator's own inner vision, produced work truly not of this world. The monster art of Basil Goos provides many terrific examples of the title subject, but is a much larger work, addressing Goos' accomplishments outside of these subjects. It is an artfully composed and well-designed book with stunning reproductions of over 80 paintings, as well as numerous sketches, photographs, and other compelling bits to keep you occupied for hours to come. This one is well worth digging up. That's the famous movie monster art of Basil Goos from Vanguard. You betcha. And it's still available. In softback, at least. That's where I got my copy. $25. What a deal. Okay, and then on to the comics themselves. And we're going to start off strong with Basil Wolverton and the Planet of Terror. Passport, please. And I gotta say, as much as I enjoy the stories inside, I was especially thrilled to get this, a little featurette on the artist himself. And this includes a couple photographs of Mr. Wolverton. And I gotta say, you would think that the internet would be, a place where you could find just about anything. But these days, not so much. So old comics can not only be entertaining, but a tremendous resource as well. You heard it here first, folks. Then from Eclipse Comics, it's Dinosaurs Attack. Now, obviously, I'm a big Mars Attacks fan, and when I saw this, I thought, there might be something to that. And when I realized it had artwork by no less than Earl Norem, well, I was all in. Earl Norem is a noted painter. Here's some wonderful stuff in the back, some sort of lobby cards for the show. Everywhere you look, fearsome, cold-blooded, flesh-hungry dinosaurs. It's brilliant stuff. Very potent, very visceral. Not all the artwork in here is by Norem, but the painted stuff is, and it's an absolute knockout. Highly recommended. And then we have some pre-code reprints from the chilling world of Craig Yo. And how about that cover, huh? Oh, yeah. Mixing up a nice brew. You know it's good when it's slopping over the edges. And how about some weird love? Ladies? What's going on the inside? Why, no less than a nightmare come true. How about this guy? And that is some weird, wild stuff, as Johnny would say. Highly inventive, very effective, and really hits you where you live. And this one really caught me up. You can tune a piano, but you can't cheat a ghost. That is right, especially when they have a big old sword and a stockade. Dig this guy just looking in horror at his own hands. My God. And then we're going to shift a little bit because we got some wonderful underground books here, specifically books from one of my favorite artists, Rand Holmes. And this is Harold Head #2.
While many underground artists of the era can leave something to be desired, Holmes is not one of them. His work has a depth and detail rarely seen in such pages, its form and composition more akin to the work of masters like Wally Wood than other counterculture creators. And the story's lots of fun, too.
And then more than a decade later, Rand Holmes came back. He joined forces with Kitchen Sink Comic to bring us Harold Head and Hitler's Cocaine. And this is full color, and it's all new. And once again, this has a very nice photo of the artist himself. Previously, I was forced to use a self-portrait that he had done because that was really the most effective image I could find of him. Harold Head and Elmo getting up to their old shenanigans. Seems Elmo's rich uncle has died. And what did he leave him? A parrot. And it turns out the parrot likes the booze. Big surprise. And later on, they get mixed up with the narcotics division and a rather familiar-looking cop. And then here's the second issue. That's quite the dazzling image as well. Feels very much like EC comic of the 1950s, sort of like the postcode New Look books. Absolutely dynamic series of panels featuring the boat's explosion. Eye-popping stuff. And then, speaking of eye-popping, it's The Mummy. And who brought us this? Why, it's no less than Monster Comics. Well, that should be no surprise, huh? And this is a fun book, I have to say. I didn't really know much about it, but when I stumbled across it in the dollar bins, I thought that it was apropos for the season. And on the inside, we have some effective black and white imagery, compelling-looking stalactites there, adding to the ambiance, if you will. And then look who it is. It's the Mummy. And he doesn't stay all bandaged up for long before you know it. He's raging, killing people, making his way to the surface. And you know what? I have a hard time waking up in the morning too, but I don't make that big of a damn deal about it. And then here's another underground book that I thought that I would share with you. This is Myon Moose Funnies #2. There's a strip in the back that I just had to share with you. And it's all about those comic book fans.
You may have met one or two in your time. I know that I have. Imagine getting all worked up about something like that, huh? Now, excuse me, I have to go and triple bag my little Lulus. I think one more layer of protection ought to do it.
So yeah, might hit a little close to home, but hey, the best satire does. Absolutely. And then speaking of close to home, I live in Pittsburgh. That's where Old Guys Who Like Old Comics headquarters is, and Night of the Living Dead took place just up the road there. Yes, it did. Pittsburgh filmmaker George Romero brought us that wonderful film, and we have this Prelude adaptation right here. Looking at the artwork, I found that, the movie is just so literal. George was making industrial films. George made commercials. George had a tendency to kind of look straight on at things.
This can leave the film feeling more like a documentary than a horror flick, which is fine. It works. However, the impressionistic and rather undefined artwork in the comic simply isn't a good tonal match for the subject. I get what they were going for, and there are some nice visceral touches. And hey, how about this guy? Always nice to see a familiar face in a stressful situation. Next up, who doesn't love the Stooges, I ask you? Oh, put your hand down. I snagged this one mostly for the kooky cover, but dig some of these reader-created monsters. I sense a lot of therapy in these kids' futures. And then in this episode of Little Monsters, Mama runs out of power halfway through her workday, and only a few bolts of lightning will get her going again. Hey, that ball of yarn ain't knitting itself. And let's wrap things up with a few more images from Dinosaurs Attack, as they're just so delightful. I'm not sure if an entire card set was produced, but I know that I'll be on the lookout. I mean, these cards contain important life lessons that you're just not going to get anywhere else. I mean, you don't want to have to explain this situation to the wife.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us on this very special episode of Having a Drink with Mink. Like I said, 1,400 subscribers, pretty good, huh? Well, thank you to each and every one of you. It means a lot to me. Until the next time, that'll be Halloween. I'll see you then. Cheers.